So welcome everyone. Thanks for being here with us today. My name is Colleen McMillan, and I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome you to our very first webinar in the Fireside Chat series, Advocacy 101, a collaboration brought to you by Action, the Save Your Skin Foundation, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada. Louise and I are thrilled to have you here with us today. Before we get going, I'd like to briefly share the inspiration behind this series and a bit about today's topic, and then Louise and I will introduce ourselves before jumping right into the heart of Advocacy 101. So I'd like to start by acknowledging, first and foremost, that advocacy in the oncology space is certainly no small feat. Oh, we'll just go back to the last slide, sorry. Thank you. There we go. So yeah, as I was saying, advocacy in the oncology space is no small feat. It's not for the faint of heart, and the systems are very complex with so many players and payers involved. I've been the advocacy lead at LLSC for just over 2 years now, and while I've been a long-time advocate, entering the healthcare world was a whole new challenge. I very quickly realized that there was a steep learning curve, and I had and definitely still have a lot to learn. When I first came into this work, I thought I could quickly pick things up and just dive in, but discovered that wasn't going to be that simple. However, being new also did give me a unique perspective because I had to build that strong foundation and understand the key players and the essential information I would need to even start navigating work in this space. One of the biggest blessings in my journey so far has been meeting Louise Binder at a conference. From the start, I recognized Louise as an incredible expert with years of expertise, insider knowledge, and a deep understanding of the field, which I'm sure we all can agree with. Together, we make a great team, blending my fresh perspective with Louise's expertise. We work together to lay out the building blocks of effective advocacy and try to stay on top of the constant changes in this space. In future sessions of the series, we'll cover other topics like healthcare systems, the drug approval process, ethical considerations in advocacy, and the role of data and AI. That's just to name a few. There will be more, but ultimately, Fireside Chats is about creating a relaxed space to explore issues that matter in advocacy work, sharing insights, and it's a chance for us to connect with all of you. So today, we'll start with the foundational building block, Advocacy 101. Healthcare advocates focus on critical issues like equitable access to care, reducing health disparities, promoting affordable prescription drugs, and addressing psychosocial aspects of the cancer experience like mental health, financial toxicities, and caregiver burden. Advocates really play a vital role in driving meaningful change in healthcare, but how and why do we do this work? So that's what we'll begin exploring today. Whether you're here because you're passionate about learning and making a difference, or if you're just starting out in your advocacy journey, we've tried to design this webinar to give you the tools, knowledge, and confidence to be a strong voice for those affected by cancer. Advocacy drives change, whether it's for policies, resources, or raising awareness. So today we'll dive into what advocacy is and what it isn't, the different types of advocacy, why we do this work, and how each of us can make a meaningful impact in our communities. So thanks again for joining us. We hope you find this session informative and empowering. And without further ado, Louise, would you like to formally introduce yourself and then I'll do the same?
Sure. Good day from wherever you may be joining us. My name is Louise Binder, and I'm the health policy consultant for Save Your Skin Foundation, which is a patient-led organization dedicated to the fight against non-melanoma skin cancers, melanoma, and ocular melanoma. And we do this through education, advocacy, and awareness initiatives across Canada. SYSF provides a community of oncology patients and caregiver support throughout the entire continuum of care, from prevention and diagnosis to survivorship. I'm also the co-chair of the Access to Treatment and Innovation Oncology Network, which we call ACTION for short, along with Martine Elias of Myeloma Canada. Action is a network of patient groups working together to promote greater education and understanding of therapies to ensure that people living in Canada have equal, timely access to these therapies, companion diagnostics, and to supportive care. Action is the co-sponsor of this webinar series, and Save Your Skin Foundation is the secretariat for Action. As a health policy consultant, I analyze systemic health policy activities of engaged healthcare parties, including governments, industry, the medical community, and researchers, and I provide input to decision makers and to the patient community regarding systemic health policy issues. I promise we're going to talk about that, what that means in more detail shortly, and also access issues. And I'm working now primarily, although not entirely, in the oncology space. My background in studies is English literature and law, and I've been doing health policy work for patients since 1994. Over to you, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Louise. So hello again, everyone, and hi to anyone who may just be joining us. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Colleen McMillan, and I'm the advocacy lead at the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada, lovingly known as LLSC. I'm a career advocate with a background in social service work, and I've spent most of my career working in the community services sector. In my current role at LLSC, I participate in all of our advocacy initiatives, focusing on our goal of ensuring that the right treatment gets to the right person at the right time. I work closely with members of the blood cancer community, including those personally affected by blood cancers, care partners, and clinicians, to gather insights, understand their experiences, and ensure that their voices are heard by decision makers. I'm very passionate about advocacy and very happy to be here with all of you today to dive into this important topic. So now that you know Louise and I a little bit better, let's get started on our journey into Advocacy 101. We'll start off with a land acknowledgement. As we gather virtually today, we acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples across what is now known as Canada. This land has been home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities for thousands of years. We honor their longstanding relationships with these territories, which continue to this day. We recognize the ongoing stewardship of the land by Indigenous peoples and the importance of acknowledging the histories, cultures, and contributions of the original caretakers of these lands. We invite everyone to reflect on the land they're joining from and to engage in our collective journey of reconciliation. And if anyone wants to add a special land acknowledgement of your own from where you're tuning in from, please feel free to do so in the chat. Now for today's agenda, our main objective for the sessions is to provide you with foundational knowledge and practical skills in patient advocacy and to explore how you can make a positive impact by effectively supporting and influencing change within the oncology community. And here's what we'll be covering: our definition of advocacy. So what does advocacy mean to you? We'll talk about advocacy myths. We'll break down and clarify some common misconceptions. We'll go through the different types of advocacy and explore the different forms and how each can be used to drive change. We'll go through advocacy values and principles and dive into some core values and principles that guide effective advocacy efforts. And we'll go through the steps in the advocacy process, because advocacy is in fact a process. So we'll explore that concept and we'll outline some key steps that you can take in your own advocacy work. We go to the next slide, please. There we go. Sorry, it wasn't showing up. No, back one. I think I have a lag. Thank you, Jasmine. So now we'll cover some housekeeping items and just make sure that things run smoothly. We all know what virtual presentations can be like. So starting with participation, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. You can let everyone know your name and your organization if you belong to one. We do want this to be a very interactive chat. So if you have anything to say, feel free to plug it in there. Throughout the session, there will be opportunities for you to participate in interactive components. However, we have to be mindful of our timing because we do have a big group today. So we'll move through these in a timely manner. We're very fortunate that we have Jasmine and Katie from Save Your Skin Foundation with us today for tech support and moderating and to help us keep track of time. So thank you both so much for that. If we have any time left at the end and the opportunity arises, we hope to have some time for discussion, but we'll need to monitor and see how that goes. I also do want to mention that due to the size of the group, we may not be able to hear from everyone who wants to contribute. However, please know that we do truly value your input. We encourage you to share your thoughts and questions, like I said, via the chat, and feel free to interact with each other throughout the session as well. For muting and unmuting, I believe that we started out with everyone just being muted, but as with any virtual presentation, please just remember to keep your microphones muted to help reduce any background noise, and just unmute yourself if you're called on to speak. And recording. So we just want to make sure that and reiterate that this session is being recorded for future reference. The recording will be sent out to all registrants afterward, and we want to ensure that everyone, again, is aware of that. And additionally, please be mindful of confidentiality. So if you're participating in conversations either live with us or within the chat, just try to avoid sharing any personal details like names to maintain privacy. And contact information. So for post-webinar support, if you have any questions, comments, or need further support after the webinar, Louise and I will be providing our contact information at the end, and we're both happy to hear from you. And just one more thing, our disclaimer. So while we're excited to engage with you, we want to clarify that neither Louise or I or our healthcare professionals. This platform is meant to just offer generalized information and insights into advocacy work, not specific advice related to your individual advocacy work. And the opinions that we will give throughout the webinar are our own opinions and based on our own personal experience working in this field. So we encourage you to keep questions and comments general. So with that, let's dive in and get started. So here we will be laying our foundation with this question: how do you define advocacy? So to make this interactive, Jasmine has been so kind as to create a word cloud for us. So if you have your phone handy, please feel free to scan the QR code on the screen to enter some words or phrases that come to mind when you think about advocacy. And if you're unable to scan the QR code for any reason, no worries. You can also type your thoughts directly into the chat, and we'll make sure to add those words to the word cloud as well. So after the webinar, we'll do our best to send the word cloud to everyone, so you'll be able to see the collective ideas and perspectives that everyone shared today. We hope to share it on the screen here as well. So we'll give everyone 2 to 3 minutes to contribute to the word cloud. So please take a moment to share your thoughts, and we'll see how the word cloud evolves. It's looking good. Thank you for everyone participating. I see there are a few people typing. You can keep it coming. I love champion. I made myself a little list before I started, and I see a few of my words are in here. Humanity, amazing. Support, of course, we can see, I believe, is someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the bigger words mean that more people entered that word. So I'm always interested to see what that looks like. And I will be taking this and printing it off and framing it in my office later. So don't be intimidated by that, but you'll be hanging forevermore in my office. I see we have a couple more people typing, but yeah, some of the words, just so I can share too, that I had written down beforehand, were support, empowerment, action, justice, voice, change, awareness, community, and equity. Those were some of my words. So yeah, we'll collect we might have already started collecting the words from the chat and adding them to this, but we'll add those all together and we'll send that out after the webinar along with the recording and a few other things. So now I'm going to pass it over to Louise.
So one of my favorite words that I saw on there was, oh, we've gone past there, sorry. Can we look at the word cloud again? Can it come up again? Maybe not. Ownership was a word that really reaches out to me, because I think that as patients, we're the experts, we're the owners of our information, and we should really be, I don't like the term patient-centric. We should be at the top of the pyramid, and everybody else should be assists to the work that we do. So that's my view of the world, which sometimes clashes with the view of some of the other stakeholders I deal with, but I stick to my guns on that one. So what does advocacy mean? It's actually a word that comes from the Latin, and I think we have that on the next slide for people to see. It comes from a phrase called that is ad vocare, which means to call towards or to invite people to come towards. So what we're doing is we're calling the decision makers and those we want to influence towards us and towards what we're looking for. So that means that advocacy is not an end in itself, but it's a toolkit. And it's a toolkit that we're going to share with you, at least our tool, what's in our toolkit of advocacy today, and see how it resonates with the work that you're doing and the tools that you use in your advocacy work. So if we can get to the next slides, we'll talk a bit about myths. Jasmine, are you switching slides for us? We're having trouble with this slide switching.
It happens. The beauty of virtual meetings.
There we go. So first I want to talk a little bit about myths about advocacy, because there are a lot of it, a lot of them. I'll pick up some of the main ones that I've heard. So as I mentioned a moment ago, advocacy is not an end in itself. People say, oh, you're an advocate. Well, what does that mean? It means really that you're someone who is carrying around a toolkit. I think of it as a toolkit, but it's not the final destination. So for example, your final destination might be to advocate for someone to get access to a treatment that they need. So your destination is getting the person that treatment. Advocacy is the tools you use in your toolkit to get to that destination. So it's not a destination in itself. And when people say I'm an advocate, I say, no, I'm a patient representative. Advocacy is a toolkit that I use to represent people when they need me. Also, we hear sometimes that advocacy is lobbying. It is not lobbying. Lobbying is when a company hires a consultant to go to a decision maker and to ask that decision maker to please do something for them. For instance, to purchase their medication. We don't do that. What we do is we actually try to influence decision makers to do what's good for patients, whether it's providing access to treatments or making good health policy that is really valuable to patients involved. So we are not lobbyists, and don't ever let anybody convince you that we are. Advocacy is confrontational. Well, it certainly can get there at a certain point in time. But as I said, this is a toolkit, and it includes a lot of other tools other than just confrontation. You get to confrontation in advocacy when all else has failed. At least that's the way I think of it. So what else? There's another myth about advocacy is that it requires formal training. And it doesn't. And on the next slide, you'll see that formal training is not required to do advocacy. Passion is certainly a key element in advocacy. And what you just need to know is the formula for doing advocacy. And we're going to share our formula in this webinar for you about how we do advocacy and the formula that we use to get there. So you don't need formal training, and you certainly learn on the job. I certainly have over the years, and I've made lots of mistakes along the way, but that's okay because we learn to do better when we have that. When I think the mistakes I've made have taught me more than the times I've been successful, actually. Advocacy always requires a lot of time and resources. It may, if you're doing a huge advocacy campaign, and I'm going to talk about a few huge advocacy campaigns as we go along, it for sure, it can require time and it can require resources. But if it's an advocacy not a campaign, but if it's advocacy, for instance, for an individual person, for yourself, for a small group, it may indeed not require the amount of time and resources that these large campaigns do. But I don't want to fool you into thinking that you don't need to put in time and resources to do advocacy. It just may not be as daunting as you think it is. And the last thing that we hear about advocacy is, that it's something that will give you instant gratification. And in fact, that's not true. This is a slow and steady wins the race kind of work. And if you prefer work that gives you instant gratification, you may not find this very helpful. So it's very important that you don't get disappointed if the first time you advocate to someone, they say no. One of the most important rules I've learned about advocacy is that people need to know that you never give up. So when I write a letter to someone, I think I've been around long enough that they know that if they say no to me for the first meeting, I'm going to continue to ask for those meetings until finally they get tired of getting my letters and they actually invite me in. Whether I get what I want from them or not, that changes from time to time. But absolutely, one of the big rules in advocacy is for people to know that you do not intend to give up, no matter how many times they say no to you, if you know that what you're doing is right for patients. So please, you have to be a patient person to do advocacy. So what then do we want to say about advocacy? And as I've said, on our next slide, I've defined advocacy. I call it, and I'm going to repeat this several times, it's a toolkit, and it's a toolkit of strategy and tactics to give voice to your needs and to the needs of others. And of course, you're doing that to those in the ecosystem. And there was a question about the ecosystem. The ecosystem is whomever you need to do what you want to have done, whether it's access to treatments or whether it's health policy changes. Your ecosystem will include industry, it will include researchers, it will include physicians, healthcare providers, it will include industry. So there are lots of people in our ecosystem, and you may be advocating to any one or to any group of them in order to help patients with what they're needing. So now, just to talk about the types of advocacy, there are 4 types generally of advocacy. One is self-advocacy, one is individual advocacy, one is group advocacy, and the one that I tend to do most of the time is systemic advocacy. So I'm going to turn it over to Colleen, who's going to talk a little bit about each of these areas of advocacy.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. If we could just go to the next slide, we're going to dive a little deeper into each of these 4 types. And the first type that we'll talk about is self-advocacy. So, self advocacy is all about speaking up for yourself and effectively communicating needs to the healthcare team. It's crucial that people actively participate in decisions about their healthcare and ensure that they're fully informed through every step of the process. An example of this is if someone is uncertain about maybe a diagnosis or a treatment plan, they have the right to ask for a second opinion, and that can really help them feel more confident in their choices. It's always, or also, sorry, important to clarify medical terms and treatment options, which is something that I am learning for myself along the way. There are many, many of those complicated terms. And if something isn't clear, people really shouldn't hesitate to ask their doctor to, or anyone in their team, to explain it in simpler terms or to outline all of the available treatment options, along with the risks and benefits of those treatment options. Another great way to advocate for oneself is by bringing a trusted support person to appointments. And I can't stress that enough. This person can help take notes and ask questions and make sure that nothing important gets missed during the conversation. I know with myself, even heading into a doctor's appointment, I have all these ideas of things that I want to say, and then I get there and I just blank. This person can help bring those things up. And it's often easier sometimes to advocate for someone else than it is for yourself. So it's nice to have another person there who's willing to push that a little bit. Additionally, people should make sure to set clear expectations for follow up and care. For instance, asking about the follow up process after treatment. What will that look like? What are the next steps? So they're not left guessing about what comes next, because I feel like that just adds fuel to the anxiety fire, and nobody needs that. And people shouldn't be afraid to manage their appointments and schedules in a way that works for them. So if scheduling is difficult, or if you need more time to talk to your healthcare provider, you should feel okay about speaking up and advocating for what you need. And self advocacy is really about making sure that their needs are heard and that they have the power to make informed decisions about healthcare. This is absolutely a key achievement that advocates should encourage and empower people to do for themselves. Helping individuals take control of their healthcare experience is an essential part of advocacy. So next we'll focus on individual advocacy, which centers on the interests of a single person, or in some cases, even a small group of individuals, ensuring that their specific needs and circumstances are addressed. This type of advocacy involves taking action to secure resources or to support healthcare that's tailored to the unique situation of one person. For example, an advocate might work to ensure that a patient has access to a specific treatment option that's better tailored to their unique health needs. This can involve advocating for approval of an experimental drug or a clinical trial, a specific diagnostic test, or a more personalized care plan that isn't necessarily part of standard treatment protocols. And individual advocacy also includes making sure that a person receives the right level of care based on their particular condition, on their personal preferences, or even their financial constraints. And advocates can work to help individuals navigate complex healthcare systems to make sure they aren't falling through the cracks or being overlooked. That kind of advocacy is particularly important in cases where the healthcare system might not automatically provide the tailored support that a patient needs. For instance, a person might require a more specialized treatment or diagnostic test, and individual advocacy can step in to make sure that they receive the necessary care to manage their specific situation. Ultimately, the goal of individual advocacy is to ensure that every person receives healthcare that is personalized and appropriate and accessible, and making sure that they're not just treated as a number in the system, but as the unique individual that they are with distinct needs. Because these aren't just people with a diagnosis, these are people who have lives and other contributing factors that come from what they're doing every day and what their life looks like, what their circumstances are, and those should be a part of these healthcare plans. So we'll move on next to group advocacy. And group advocacy focuses on representing the interests of individuals or communities who share a common issue or challenge. So unlike individual advocacy, which centers on one person's needs, group advocacy brings together people who are affected by similar circumstances or conditions in order to create a collective voice. For example, advocates might work to improve healthcare resources for patients in a specific jurisdiction or a specific disease area. This could mean ensuring that patients in a particular region have access to treatment or testing or support services that they might otherwise lack. It could involve efforts to raise awareness about a disease or condition that's underrepresented or underfunded, or pushing for better access to care for an underserved group. The focus is working with others who face the same challenges. So whether that's a group of patients, a group of caregivers, or people within a specific community, and collaborating to bring attention to shared concerns and address them on a larger scale. The aim of group advocacy is to address the needs of a collective, helping to improve access to, like I said, resources, raising awareness, and creating changes that benefit the entire group. And by working together, advocates can amplify their voices, making it more likely that their concerns are heard and acted on. So, group advocacy is really all about strength in numbers and uniting people to create collective power and to drive broader, meaningful change. And now I will hand it back over to Louise, who's going to talk to us a little more in depth about systemic advocacy.
Thanks, Colleen. So, systemic advocacy is advocacy that has as its goal a creation of change in policies, practices, laws, regulations to improve the overall healthcare system to benefit society as a whole, or indeed to benefit one group of society as a whole. So a few examples, and I'm going to get into details about some of these, and actually how those advocacy opportunities occurred, how that advocacy work was actually done. I'm going to give some case studies in a few minutes. So, for example, the Pharmacare Act. That is a piece of systemic advocacy that was done by a group of people who felt that we needed a federal pharmacy. We needed a federal act to ensure universal drug coverage. So that's one example. Anytime you are able to convince a provincial government to reimburse treatments for a group such as a cancer group, that is systemic advocacy. You've changed the system. It's not just about one individual. It's not even just about a small group of people. It's about the entire group of people who need this. So it's a very different way of doing advocacy in a sense than the other three that Colleen has mentioned, but the formula for doing advocacy, whether it's individual advocacy, group advocacy, or systemic advocacy, is actually the same. And I think when we get to the case studies, I'll be able to show you how that's actually true. So I'm wondering now if we could ask you a question, which is, what types of, you've heard the 4 types of advocacy. What types of advocacy have you been involved in, either in your work or in your personal life? And we have a poll that we'd love you to take a few moments to fill out, and you can pick as many choices here as you think apply.
We'll give everyone another minute or so, and then we should be able to show the poll results up on the screen. How's the poll looking, Jasmine? or Katie. I don't know who's running the poll.
Good, I can go ahead and end it now, and you guys should be able to see the results. Let's see. If not, I can kind of just verbally let you guys know.
It would be great if it can come up on the screen. I have no idea how I'd ever do that, but if you if you know how to do that, that would be marvelous. There we go. Look at that.
Amazing.
So all of you at least have done each form of advocacy at some point. That's amazing. Self-advocacy for sure. We do self-advocacy every single day. When you go to the bank to get a bank loan, when you go to the pharmacy and your prescription isn't ready and you need it right now, anytime that you are really interacting with someone to get something done for yourself, that is advocacy for sure. And I'm glad to see that you recognize that you're actually all 88% of you are already doing self-advocacy. And my bet is that actually 100% of you are really doing self-advocacy. You just didn't name it self-advocacy, but you're doing it. Individual advocacy, 61% of you. So I'm guessing that a number of you said that because you assist another patient or a caregiver, or you are a caregiver, and that you are involved in doing individual advocacy for the person for whom you need to, the person you need to help, whether it's helping them at a doctor's appointment, again, at a pharmacy, with any kind of a healthcare provider, with any kind of a government person that they're having trouble getting access to or access from, that you're doing individual advocacy for that person. Group advocacy, I'm glad to see that a number of you have been doing group advocacy. I'd love it if some of you would put in the chat what kinds of group advocacy particularly you've done, because that's a very interesting area for sure. And 58% of you have done systems advocacy. And I'd be very interested if you want to throw some examples of that into the chat as well. Be lovely to see the kinds of advocacy that you've been doing at a systemic level. Of course, that's very close to my heart for sure. There we go. Change their marketing. Look at that. What these are great things that are coming up on the chat. Pushed a pharmaceutical company to change their marketing to include a more diverse population in their marketing. That's fabulous advocacy work. Good for you, Janice. Anybody else want to put anything in the chat that we should have a look at? Okay.
I do want to just mention there is a question here. What are your thoughts on knowing the players in the ecosystem? It's not necessarily about the types of advocacy, but I just wanted to mention that that's actually going to be the topic of our next webinar, Health System. So stay tuned.
But I did at least give a broad answer to that by saying that it'll certainly include governments of all kinds. It's certainly going to include the pharmaceutical industry and maybe some other industries that make medical devices, anything that's related to healthcare. It'll certainly include the medical profession and other healthcare providers. And in some cases, it will include researchers if you have to happen to be in a clinical trial or helping with a clinical trial, which is becoming much more the case with researchers partnering with patients to do good work and create good clinical trials. So that's some of the ecosystem. I'm sure I'm not thinking of everybody, but those I think are the main players that always jump to my mind. And I love to see Michelle's response, trying to save wastewater surveillance and expand it across Canada. That's an amazing piece of advocacy work as well. Let's see what else we have. Okay, leading co-design workshops to include clinical trial access. We were just talking about that. Co-design of clinical trials, very important. We're experts in clinical trials. They don't always see us, the researchers and the healthcare providers don't always see us as experts, but we are. We can look at a clinical trial design and tell you whether that trial design has any chance of getting people to join the trial and to stay in the trial, and what are the barriers that you've created or gaps that exist that will stop people from doing that. And we can help you to craft your clinical trial in a way that will make it a success. So that's very important. As a community outreach advisor in a political office, I had many opportunities to advocate for underserved populations. Oops, sorry, I'm going a little too fast here. Oh, I keeps jumping past. I had many opportunities to advocate for underserved groups and was able to influence policy change. Thank you so much for doing that. Sure, it couldn't have been easy to do that. Develop patient navigation tools for cancer treatment, work at provincial and national cancer organizations in group and systemic advocacy. And we have a list of the groups that they've worked with, that you've worked with, Sandra. That's amazing. Thank you for that hard work. Helping to determine research grant funding in the blood cancer realm. That's another very important one. And I think I've passed. Is it okay to share our LinkedIn links? Of course. You'd love to connect with everyone. I think if people want to do that, absolutely, that would be great. Keeping people connected is one of the most important things I think an advocate can do. We all need to help each other and teach each other. So that's wonderful. So here you go and share. TEDx are about ideas worth sharing. I'm not selling anything. Glad to hear that, because then you'd be a lobbyist and that would be another story altogether. So can we please build a list of all the cool things patient advocates have done? This is so amazing to see. It is amazing to see, and it gives people hope. And I'm going to actually share a few case studies that I've been involved with that I hope will also give you some hope as you move forward. I want to tell you, I've lost more fights than I've won, so I don't want to give anybody the impression that you always win, but I at least have won some battles, and I see that some of you have won some battles, and that makes it all worthwhile. So anybody who wants to put their LinkedIn information in the chat, that would be great. So there we are. Now I'm going to take you on another journey that you may or may enjoy going on. And this is what I call the lenses through which I look when I'm trying to make a decision about advocating for something. Because for me, it's very important that my advocacy is foundationally based on values and belief systems that I have. You may have different ones, and your advocacy, therefore, might be based on different foundational principles, but I'm going to share with you mine, and it'll be interesting to see what you think about them. So the first belief that I have is that in Canada, in a country like Canada, people deserve a publicly run healthcare system that serves them well, that meets their needs, and that includes access to drugs. And so when I'm doing my work, that is foundational to me. If that is not happening, we need to be advocating for it to happen. Regrettably, as we all know, there seems to be limited resources, although I think there's no reason, by the way, for there to be limited resources. But if there are, as it relates to drug access, survival and decent quality of life for people, it has to come to the top of the pile. But I wish there weren't a pile. I wish that we would actually do three, which is that resources are available for everybody and they're available equally for everybody, and that structurally underserved populations who have less access to healthcare have disparities that create that addressed and corrected. So that's something in which I believe very much. I also believe that governments should also, in addition to prioritizing health directly, they should prioritize investments in social determinants of health, which include employment, housing, food security, mental health, addictions. And it's essential for governments to meet people where they're at and to be guided by the insights and needs of those directly affected. And we know, unfortunately, that racialized populations and Indigenous populations are often underrepresented in all of these areas, more than they should be based on their population, their place in the general population. And that's unacceptable. And that needs to be, the advocacy around those issues need to continue for sure, with, of course, the lead by those who are in those populations. So let's move to the rest of my values and beliefs, or at least the main ones. On the next slide, you'll see that I also believe very much that government practices, policies, laws, and services that address these needs should be encouraged and supported, with continuous improvements welcomed, which they generally aren't. Whenever we make suggestions for improving systems, we're often shut down, and that's just not acceptable. There needs to be effective monitoring so that we don't just live on empty promises, and this is certainly the season of empty promises, if there ever is one, and ensure accountability. When there's a lack of follow-through, we must bring attention to it. It's one of the reasons that all of us need to listen to what politicians are promising, all of them. This is not nonpartisan. We need to be listening to what politicians are promising us during this election season, and whoever is elected, we should hold them to account for what they've promised. They make a lot of promises during this what some people call the silly season of politics, and we really need to be sure that we listen to what they say and that we hold them accountable after the election. All interested parties must play a part in achieving these goals and should act accordingly. Patients in particular should be valued as experts, and our expertise is often underrated and underappreciated, and we have to make sure that we fight for people to recognize the expertise that we bring to the table. I also believe strongly that decisions made that impact patients must include meaningful patient representation. And I believe that patients should have a veto power over choices that are not in their best interests. And that's very controversial for some of the other stakeholders, I can assure you. Nothing about us without us. And the last is that policies must be transparent, with regular monitoring and evaluation that welcomes constructive input from all interested parties and patients in particular. So I call these the lenses through which I look at advocacy that I do. We are the workflow, exactly. I actually had an opportunity. I was at the Canadian Medical Association meeting last week, and in the first panel, there was actually no reference by any of the doctors about patients. And I was fortunate enough to grab the head of the CMA as she came off the stage, and I said to her, "Where are the patients? Why aren't you talking specifically about patients? Because, you know, we can be our best allies." And I want to give her credit, because you know what she said back to me? She said, "Actually, we're your best allies because we should be working for you." So if the rest of the medical community could only see it that way, I think we'd have much better partnerships and collaborations and better health outcomes for people and better health policy as well. So when we get to my case studies, you're going to see how these values and principles have actually been implemented by me in doing my work. But before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to Colleen to talk about steps. We said that advocacy is a process and a formula, and it is. And this is the formula that certainly we've developed for doing our advocacy work.
Thank you, Louise. Before we get into this slide, could we actually just go back to the last slide for one moment? Because I just want to introduce a poll here too. We wanted to ask you, like we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these are our opinions and our thoughts that we're presenting to you today. And we wonder, particularly for these values and beliefs, do you agree with the principles? So there's some options: strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. If you wouldn't mind to take another minute, we'll take a quick pause here for you to fill out that poll and just get a consensus. How do we feel about those? If you feel strongly one way or the other about one of the values or principles in particular, feel free to keep using the chat. I'm loving seeing all of the interactions in the chat. That was one of our main goals, is we really wanted to connect and get people talking. So thank you for that. But yeah, if you feel strongly, please feel free to put in the chat. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We'll take another minute for everyone to finish up, and then we'll take a look at the poll results.
I'm excited to see the poll results.
And I should say too, neither Louise or I will be offended. We both love a good debate and we love to hear other people's opinions. So feel free to put whatever you're thinking or feeling into the chat.
And you can add some too if you want. That'd be fabulous.
Absolutely. Well, there's our poll results. Well, it looks like we're on the right track, so that's great. I think we're with some like-minded individuals in the room. Amazing. I'm just checking the chat and we've got some comments here. Patients are experts. Yes, I think that's something we can all agree on. The mention of equal sometimes gives me ponder, as it really isn't equal as much as equitable, since not everyone is in the same boat and some need more support and advocacy than others. And I would agree that that's
So
true.
can I comment about that? Because I think we need both. I think we need equal, everybody should get equal access to things, and they should also get equitable access, which means fairness. So to the point that the person is making, it absolutely may be that the starting line for people is different. And we should absolutely make sure that we're being fair and bringing everybody up to the same starting line, which is what I think about when I think about equitability. And then once we're all at the same starting line, then we should all equally get access to what we need in this healthcare system. So I certainly agree. Equal is very important. I think and equitable is very important. I actually think we need both. So thank you for that clarification and giving me the opportunity to kind of speak a little bit about my thinking on that. Doesn't mean everybody will agree, and that's what that's how the world goes. But I actually think we need both.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone so much for your participation in that. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide. And we did actually touch on this a little bit earlier, and Louise also introduced it, but we touched on it when we discussed our myths about advocacy. But to reiterate and dive a little bit deeper, advocacy doesn't just magically happen. There is a proven process for successful advocacy work that applies to all types of advocacy. And by following these steps, you'll be able to achieve the best possible results for your efforts. So let's walk through the steps in the advocacy process using this fabulous acronym, practices, and I'll explain how each step can help you advocate more effectively. First is P for patient needs. Start by identifying the patient's needs, and it's okay to give advice and offer the pros and cons of different options, but keep in mind that ultimately the decision is theirs. Your job is to provide information and support they need to and make informed decisions, but you still have to respect their autonomy. So keep patients informed every step of the way, but be willing to change your course based on their wishes. And then we have R for research. Look into relevant policies, laws, regulations, or practices. And if you need help from people with specific skill sets, for example, legal or medical, health economics expertise, get approval from the people you're working with to consult with those people and bring them in. A is for analyze. Review primary and secondary sources of information carefully. Primary sources might include laws or regulations, and then secondary sources might include medical opinions or articles about those laws or policies. So make sure you're gathering accurate and reliable data and avoid jumping to conclusions based on partial information, because it's really easy to just take something that you hear and run with it, but really, really make sure you're doing your research and that you really understand the full context before you move forward. And then we have C for communicate. Advise patients of your findings and be clear and honest and realistic with them right off the hop about the chances of success. You want to avoid giving false hope or making false promises. Be honest also with both the patient and yourself if maybe you are not the right fit for the task. The patient's best interest and best chance of success comes first, and there are circumstances where you may not be the best person to advocate for them. And still on the topic of communication, it's also really important to keep the conversation going with decision makers or other interested parties after your meeting with them. So for example, you could promise to send them some information or ask them to send you something and then follow up with them after to discuss that item. You can just send along a thank you note and a summary of the key points from your meeting, just anything that keeps that line of communication open and ensures that you have another reason to touch base again. And then we have T for target. Identify decision makers, influencers, and also opponents, and prepare for meetings with these people so that you can get an understanding of their perspectives and their roles. You want to know what you're up against or who's with you. And then right on the topic of who's with you, you want to identify your allies. I for identify allies. Prepare your case and find potential supporters. Build a coalition of allies who can back your efforts. For example, other advocates, healthcare professionals, or other organizations whose support can provide momentum to your cause. Because like we said earlier, there is strength in numbers, and collaboration is just, in my opinion, 99% the way to go. And then we have C for capture notes. This one also I can't stress enough. I think we're probably all pretty good at this, but keep detailed notes of everything you're discussing in meetings, including barriers or objections, and of course, solutions. Having a recording helps you to stay organized. You can go back and look at your notes, and it ensures that you don't miss any important points or action items. E for escalate. So you want to move up the chain of command as required and do not skip anyone. So when a decision maker is government, you'll always start with bureaucrats before approaching politicians or higher level executives. And this ensures that you're following the correct procedures and not bypassing important steps. And a real life example of this is if you had an issue with a company, for example, you might start with a manager and then move to a director, a vice president, and maybe the president if that was necessary necessary. The key is really to stick with the chain of command and approach the issue at each level. You have to go up that ladder one step at a time. And then finally, S, stay persistent. And this is, of course, a key part of advocacy. Advocacy is very rarely a straightforward path. And if you're told no, it's really just important that you don't give up. So you're going to move to the next person in the chain of command, or you can go back and revisit the previous step with new information or maybe with a different approach. And if there's a circumstance where a concession is offered, but it isn't exactly what the patient wants or originally asked for, make sure that you're going back and consulting with the patient again to ask them whether that offer is sufficient. Never answer for them. Always go back and consult with them. And if the answer is no, then you'll continue advocating based on their decision. Even if you can't complete one of the steps, don't give up. This is just a guide. Just move on to the next step and just keep pushing forward. Advocacy is a process, but it absolutely does require flexibility and, most importantly, determination. And I'm going to pass it over to Louise again for the next slide.
So practice may not make perfect, but it certainly is important. And as I said before, I've made many mistakes along the way. And the practices that we've shared there are based on many years of experience and mostly the mistakes that I made along the way. So I hope that they will be of value to you in developing your action plans and your advocacy plans. So I'd like to take you through a few case studies. These are real things that I've done, and I've done them pretty much exactly the way I'm going to describe them for you. Some of them you may know about, some of them you may not, but I think you might actually know about all three. So I'm going to start with the pharmacare legislation, since that's pretty new, top of mind, and was certainly very controversial. I started by asking myself, as you should, with with the first P, what do people need? I asked myself, what do people want? And what people want and need is access to safe and effective drugs, no matter where they live or what their financial means are. So I looked at what they were offering us in that piece of legislation to see if, in fact, it did that. And I determined that it did. So I read the legislation. You have to read, if it happens to be a piece of legislation. I'm giving this example because it was. It could be a policy, it could be a practice, it could be something else. In this case, it was a piece of legislation. So I read it carefully, and I read it against the practices in practice and against my values and beliefs. And I determined that any legislation that is going to give first dollar coverage to people who cannot otherwise access treatments, even though it was only 2 treatments, contraceptives and diabetes drugs and devices, that was more than we had before. And it was really important to support, for me, made it very important for me to support this legislation. But I didn't stop there. I then read all of what the pros and cons were of this legislation that people were writing and saying. And I met with the other stakeholder groups involved here to hear what they were saying, so that I had, so that I had a picture of the pros and cons that people had about it. I actually attended the Senate committee hearings on the pharmacare bill. I'd never done that before, and it was a fascinating experience to hear what the different positions that the senators were taking about this piece of legislation. One of the things I learned was that some of those senators didn't even understand the legislation, and yet they were sitting there going to be judge and, vote on it. I was really surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been. After all these years, nothing should surprise me, but something always does. But I did meet some really excellent senators. Having said that, really excellent, caring senators who understood exactly why this was an important piece of legislation. So then I knew who my allies were. I determined my allies. Then what I did was I took my values and beliefs and I took the practices and I created a document, which was my analysis of this legislation. And it included recommendations and conclusions about why I felt we as a patient community should support it. And I'm happy to share that document with any of you who didn't see it. I did send it around. I sent it around to the government decision makers so they would have my opinion about this for what they might feel it was worth. I shared it with other engaged parties, and in some cases was told that I was way off base, but that's okay. I've been told that a lot of times before. It doesn't discourage me if I feel that I'm following my values and belief systems. And I actually even wrote an op-ed about it that was published so that my opinions could get out in a more public fashion. Then I waited. I'd done everything I could do and I waited. And luckily, we were successful, all of us who advocated for that piece of legislation. And in fact, that piece of legislation was passed. Now let's hope that whichever government, and you should listen carefully while they're talking during this period of time, whether they're making a promise to keep this legislation in place, and in fact, even better, to extend it to more people and more medications. So listen carefully, because we want to hold them to account after this election as to what promises they make if they're in power. And even the opposition parties, hold them to their feet to the fire if they made promises to support this during their campaigns. So that I just wanted to share that. That's my first case study that I wanted to share with you. And I did follow, and I do follow every time, the practices in practice. I really do feel that it's a formula that helps me not stumble too much in doing my work. The second one I wanted to talk to you about a bit is COVID vaccines for cancer patients. Now, COVID is still with us, as I think we all know, but there was certainly that 4-year period of time when it was a profound pandemic. And one of the things I asked myself and people told me was, what do cancer patients want in relation to vaccines? And what do they need? And they told me that they wanted the second vaccines in accordance with the clinical trial provisions, which said that people should get their second vaccine after 6 weeks, not 6 months. And then I actually read the 2 vaccine trials, and they were each like this thick. So it took me a little while, but I did. I read them through cover to cover. And sure enough, they absolutely did say that in those trials, the second dose of the vaccine was given after 6 weeks, not after 6 months. Then I looked at the Ontario government policy for second vaccines, and they were taking the position that everybody should get their vaccines after 6 months, which was not in accordance with what patients wanted, and it was not in accordance with what the vaccine trial said. So I went to the Public Health Agency's guidelines, because they were supposed to be the people implementing the vaccine program. And there was nothing in it about when the vaccines ought to be given, in what order, and in what period of time. I'm sorry to miss you, Krista. Come back. I hope you'll get the recording and you'll hear the rest of this. So I reviewed that. And then I insisted on a meeting with the senior government officials in the Public Health Agency to talk to them about why the trial protocol was not being implemented. And honestly, they punted back to the provincial governments. Oh, we only make recommendations. How many times have we heard that? Oh, we only make recommendations. It's up to the provinces to decide what to do. So then I met with oncology patient groups. I'd figured out that we had to decide what we were going to do. Were we serious about insisting that they go back to the clinical trial protocol, or were we willing to live with the Ontario government's policy? So we had a large a meeting by Zoom, of course, which was the order of the day. And the decision was made by the oncology groups that we were not satisfied with following what the government was saying, but we wanted what the clinical trial said was the right way to deliver these vaccines. So what did we do? We decided that we would take a full-page ad out in the Globe and Mail. We raised funds to do that. And by the way, it was very expensive, but we felt it was worth the expense to help the patients. So we developed our ad content, and our tagline was 6 weeks, not 6 months. We published it, and the government did, in fact, change its policy. So cancer patients did receive their vaccines after 6 weeks, not 6 months. So you can win a few. I'm a little dry because I'm talking so much. So just give me a minute to wet my lips. And I'm going to take you through one more case study, which is one that actually was done years ago when I was doing work in the HIV community. And it was, I think we did this work in 1996. So it was a little while ago. So what happened? I was diagnosed with HIV in 1994. And at that time, we didn't have treatments. So I was told at that time that I had 2 years to live. Which obviously didn't work out that way, much to my pleasure, and I hope some of yours as well, although I think there might be some people who are not as happy about it as others. But what I did do was I joined up with the AIDS activists who had come together internationally to work to get research done quickly. And I went to the scientific conferences internationally, and I learned about what research was being done. And there was really excellent research being done. And there was going to be a solution here if you could stay alive long enough, which was the real challenge for people. So in 1996, as I say, the trials showed that there was an effective response for HIV patients to HIV, which was a triple combination of drugs that actually hit the virus at different parts of its life cycle. It was very fascinating work, actually. And I still admire the researcher who did it, including, by the way, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has been vilified so much and who was such a great advocate for us in those years. I feel sorry that he's being treated the way he is in this part of his life. He doesn't deserve it. So these drugs started to be approved by the FDA in the United States and by Europe, but they were not being approved here in Canada. And I had to figure out what was going on here. So what was going on was Health Canada was simply taking too long to look at these trials. It made no sense that the FDA could approve these trials within 24 weeks and our government couldn't get around to it for at least 48 weeks, which meant we were losing people. They were losing their lives when they didn't have to do that. So my first step was to meet with Health Canada. You'll recall from the practices that you start with the bureaucrats. So I started with the bureaucrats. I went to Health Canada. Why are you taking so long? Well, that's what the policy says. We take 48 weeks. It says that, so that's what we're doing, which was, of course, an unsatisfactory answer to me and to the HIV community in general. So then I went to the Minister of Health and I said, really? Are you really gonna support this? And for quite a while he did, by the way. So we and our supporters signed petitions, wrote letters, met with our MPs, and still there was no change. We started demonstrating at conferences. We started demonstrating at federal government buildings, and in front of Health Canada's buildings especially. So we still weren't there. So we started to have press conferences, and we started to get the media to write about this issue and how shocking it was. Finally, the federal minister of health, who was Alan Rock at the time, and I give him credit for his courage here, agreed to make changes to the practices of Health Canada. And that is how the notice of compliance with conditions was born. It was actually born under the auspices of the HIV community. And he held a press conference. I stood beside him when he announced it. I was very pleased to do that. And what I'm particularly pleased about is that that policy is now being used for other diseases, for life-threatening and profoundly debilitating diseases. And that is speeding up cancer drugs approval as well. So I'm very proud that we were able to do that. And it's really a legacy that community provided. So with that, I'll turn it over to Colleen.
Thank you so much, Louise. That was amazing and inspiring to be able to hear all of the good work, or not all of the good work. I know there's way more good work than that, but some of the different examples of putting practices into practice. So hopefully everyone has a better idea of sort of what those steps look like, and the success that you can have by going through the process. And so again, thank you, Louise. We have about 13 minutes left. So as we start wrapping up, Louise and I want to make sure you know that we're here to help and support you. If you have any questions or concerns after today's session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I know there were some questions that were asked that we may not get to with the limited amount of time that we have left, but please feel free to reach out to us using the information on the screen. Scan our QR codes or take a screenshot. You'll get this recording as well if you don't already have our contact information. But we really do value your engagement and want to hear what you have to say. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And then we'll pass it back over to Louise to get us rounded out here.
So
good time.
We were hoping that we were going to have a chance to ask you 2 questions. We're going to ask them. We may not get you to answer them on this call, but I think they're important questions for you to think about. So think about what strategies you found to be successful in engaging and which haven't been successful, and take a look at the values and beliefs, and take a look at the practices, and see where you might have used some of them or didn't use some of them that in retrospect you would like to use now, because it's really through what we didn't do that we learn the most rather than what we did do. So please do that. The other thing that's very important is think about what motivates you to keep going when things are really difficult and you're facing really profound barriers. And I want you to know that some days it's pretty tough. But you just must have a vision of where you want to get to. And I always what I've learned to do is to consider small successes. So even if all that happens, and this isn't all, but even if what happens is I get a meeting with someone, I consider that a success. If I get somebody to talk to me about something or to meet with me, it's a success. Every little step along the way as we move up the ladder of people we need to get to the final decision makers, everything is a little success. And you should really value those and have a glass of wine, as I like to do, to cheers and celebrate those successes. So that's what keeps me going. You'll have to decide what works for you, but don't give up. Don't give up. You will lose some, you will, but you will learn from those losses, I promise you, as much as you will learn from the gains you've had. So we're kind of at the end, and it's really time to say thank you. And first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you. It's amazing that so many of you joined us and so many of you stayed with us. This is a long webinar, and yet I gather that it was at least interesting enough for you to stay with us to the end, for which I really want to thank you. And of course, I really want to thank our generous sponsors, and I think we have their names. There we go. These are the generous sponsors without whom we could not have put on this webinar or any of the webinars in the series, which we're going to hold, of which this is the first, the inaugural. You were at the inaugural webinar. And we really want to thank them all: GSK, Janssen, AbbVie, Amgen, Bayer, and Merck. Thank you so much for supporting this work and a lot of the other work that we do as well. So our next, by the way, you're going to get an opportunity to feed back to us. You'll get a feedback form, and I really hope that you will be as candid and as you need to be to help us make the rest of our seminars as good and as helpful for you as we can possibly be, because that's really all we want to do. So our next session, as Colleen mentioned earlier, is going to be Health Systems in Canada 101. And it's the other bookend to the Advocacy 101 seminar. You need these advocacy tools, and now we're going to tell you in our next seminar where you're going to need them. And we haven't picked a date yet, but it will be posted shortly, and we really hope to see all of you there. So thank you again, Colleen.
Yes, I just want to reiterate everything Louise said. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all of the participation and engagement in the chat. It's been amazing. We really do want to hear your feedback. We will be sending out that feedback form. You'll also have the opportunity to suggest things that you might like to see in further sessions, but really happy to have this opportunity to engage with you and talk about what Louise and I are very passionate about, advocacy. Thank you for giving us this platform and for being interested in what we have to say and for being our partners in this work. Really appreciate all of you.
So we will look at, I promise you, we will look at everything that we've heard in we're collecting everything from the chat, and we'll certainly, where they are questions, we will answer them, and we'll put them up hopefully at the same time as the recording, but certainly at some point we'll put answers up to all of the questions that have been asked of us, at least the ones we know the answers to. So with that, I say thank you. Colleen, any last words?
Just thank you. Thank you all. And thank you again to Katie and Jasmine for supporting us. And I would like to give a little special shout out to Alvina, who's attending today, because she also helped us to pilot our first session and gave us her feedback. So she had a hand in the development of this webinar too. So thank you, Alvina. And thank you again to everyone for attending.
We'll see you soon.
Take care. Bye.